Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where history gets strange but the voice stays calm. Tonight, we wander into a world of gold, sand, and divine perfection, a civilization that believed its kings were gods and its gods needed constant supervision. This is the disturbing life of pharaohs in ancient Egypt, a slow descent through the rituals, burdens, and silent grandeur that shaped 3,000 years of sacred routine. Before you settle in, take a quiet moment to like the video or subscribe, only if you truly enjoy falling asleep to humanity's most elaborate mistakes. And if you're still awake enough, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's oddly comforting to know how many of us are awake at impossible hours, each in our own little corner of history. Now, dim the lights, let the fan hum softly, and drift with me to the banks of the Nile, a place where the sun never stopped rising because someone had to make sure it didn't. You stand before a river that does not end. The Nile slides past like liquid glass, carrying both the living and the dead. Its current feeds every breath, every crop, every hope for rain that never falls. Around you, the desert waits, dry, watching, and full of memory. Above it all, the sky burns so bright it feels personal, as if it knows your name and intends to test it. This is Egypt, a civilization older than most memories, a script carved into stone long before the word forever was invented. For over 3,000 years, people here believed that the order of the universe could collapse if the wrong words were said, or if the king failed to greet the morning properly. That king, of course, was not just a man. He was a god made visible, the living Horus, the beating heart of heaven inside a human body. When he breathed, Egypt breathed. When he blinked, the Nile remembered to rise, and when he died, the world trembled until his successor learned how to breathe on its behalf. Power here was not just about ruling, it was about continuing existence. You might imagine pharaohs as tyrants lounging in gold palaces, but the truth was stranger. They were cosmic employees with impossible job descriptions. Their shifts lasted from sunrise to eternity, and the benefits included immortality, political stress, and chronic sanctity. Each morning began the same way. Priests woke before dawn to burn incense and prepare sacred oils, the air filled with the scent of myrrh, resin, and the faint sweetness of honey wax. Inside the palace, servants whispered their way through corridors, carrying linen robes bleached as white as desert light. Somewhere in the stillness, the pharaoh stirred, a god pretending to be a man waking up. His first duty wasn't breakfast, it was balance. Before stepping into sunlight, he had to perform ritual washing with water drawn from the Nile, cold and heavy with silt. The gesture looked simple, but it meant something cosmic. Washing away the night, the chaos, the whisper of death. If he did not perform it, the priest said, the sun itself might hesitate. You imagine the basin glimmering, the water trembling at his touch. No one else would ever call it sweat, only divine dew. Every movement carried meaning, which sounds majestic until you realize it also meant nothing was ever casual again. Outside, temple courtyards stirred awake. Columns rose like forests of stone, painted with stories that refused to fade. Hieroglyphs shimmered in the rising light, each symbol a prayer shaped into geometry. Birds carved in wall reliefs looked ready to lift off. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with its ruler. To the people, the pharaoh's body was a bridge between heaven and dust. To him, it was a cage that could never be left unattended. He wasn't allowed to stumble, sneeze, or sigh without an interpreter. Every gesture was sacred choreography. Even silence had a script. You might envy his robes, linen, fine enough to whisper when he moved, or the gold jewellery carved into falcons and cobras. But imagine the heat beneath them, the weight of it all. Imagine knowing that if you coughed during a ceremony, a priest might quietly wonder whether the world was about to end. Somewhere, a scribe recorded every motion on a sheet of papyrus, steady as the Nile itself. The ink was made of soot and crushed plants, a small tribute to permanence. These records were not for gossip. They were reports for eternity, documenting how well the gods had behaved in human form today. And so, the sun rose over Egypt, not as a coincidence, but as a performance. Every beam of light striking a temple wall had been anticipated, aligned and mathematically planned by people who refused to believe in accidents. The universe was a calendar written in sand, and Pharaoh was the only one licensed to keep it updated. But beneath all that precision, a quieter thought lingers. What happens if he fails? If the offering bowl tips over? If the chant stumbles? If his heart wavers for even a moment? In Egypt, that wasn't superstition. That was apocalypse. So he learned not to hesitate, not to doubt, not to think like a person who might one day die. Even his shadow was treated as sacred property. No one could step on it. His reflection in water was considered divine light, not a face. And you begin to sense that in the midst of all this eternity, there was no room left for the ordinary comfort of being human. Yet, as the day unfolds, the air shimmers with both devotion and exhaustion. Gold glitters under an unrelenting sun. Incense curls upward, carrying prayers that sound suspiciously like reminders. Somewhere in the distance, a farmer prays for rain. The pharaoh prays for balance. Both hope the other is listening. If we follow the thread a little further, the story deepens, from sunlight into shadow, from perfection into the quiet tension that keeps the divine machine running. The God King will soon step out among his people, but for now, the river glimmers below his window, reflecting everything he cannot say. You might imagine the pharaoh's life as endless triumph, sun, gold, victory, and sculpted calm. But underneath that calm was a rule far stricter than any written law. It was called ma'at. The word had no perfect translation. It meant balance, harmony, truth, justice, order, and the unspoken agreement between the universe and the people living inside it. The Egyptians pictured it as a goddess, serene and small, wearing a feather on her head. When they said someone lived in Ma'at, they meant that person moved through life without disturbing the world's rhythm, and when they said Pharaoh ruled through Ma'at, they meant something heavier. His duty was not to find balance, but to be balance. Every grain of sand that shifted in the desert, every cloud that refused to form, every low flood of the Nile could be blamed on his spiritual clumsiness. To fail in devotion wasn't merely embarrassing, it was dangerous. The gods were not gentle when the scales tipped. Inside the great temples, that cosmic bookkeeping was done daily. You can picture it. Dawn sliding down the columns like liquid light, while priests in linen move soundlessly over stone floors. The scent of incense thickens the air, myrrh, cinnamon, crushed resin from distant trees. At the heart of the temple, a single chamber stays closed to all but a few. There, on an altar of polished alabaster, stands the god statue, small still and blinding with gold leaf. The pharaoh enters surrounded by silence so dense it feels alive. He bows, not as a man, but as the living stand-in for the sun itself. He offers food, pours wine, lights oil lamps. The gestures are simple, but the meaning enormous. If he neglects one, the world begins to tilt. Every motion has its twin somewhere else in the cosmos. A lamp lit here might spark the sunrise there. A libation poured here might flood a field 200 miles away. That's what living under Ma'at meant. The sacred conviction that everything touched everything else. Even the architecture echoed that belief. Temples weren't just buildings, they were miniature universes carved in limestone. The columns represented papyrus reeds, the ceiling stars, the floor the fertile earth of creation. Every inch was symbolic. The gods didn't need to live there. They already did. The rituals weren't for them. They were reminders for the humans who kept forgetting. You can feel the pressure behind the calm. One wrong chant, one candle extinguished too early, and priests would whisper about divine irritation. A gust of wind might mean the gods had frowned. Even the Nile's annual flood, that slow swelling of brown life through the valley, was read as feedback. The celestial performance review of Pharaoh's moral health. To outsiders it sounds exhausting. To Egyptians it was reassurance. If the sun rose, the Pharaoh must have done his duty. If it didn't, something sacred had slipped through his fingers. There were no weather forecasts here, only moral ones. Imagine how carefully you would move through a life like that. You wouldn't simply walk, you would measure each step against eternity. The Pharaoh's council, the vizier, priests, scribes, existed partly to keep him from making unbalanced decisions. Their debates were not about policy but about harmony. Should taxes be raised? Only if justice stayed lighter than greed. Should a new temple be built? Only if it didn't draw too much labour from the harvest. It was an economy of equilibrium, measured not in numbers but in calm. Even war was justified through Ma'at. When armies marched across deserts, they said they were restoring order, not conquering. Enemies weren't merely foreigners, they were embodiments of chaos. Every spear thrown was, in theory, a prayer for stability. The Pharaoh himself was the living feather of Ma'at, weightless yet crucial, placed on the cosmic scale beside every human heart. You may have heard of the test that awaited the dead, the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth. It wasn't just a myth for the afterlife, it was the model for all living judgment. When a judge sentenced a thief, he invoked Ma'at. When a farmer shared water fairly, he practiced Ma'at. And when the Pharaoh's heart stayed steady through famine or flood, the people slept easier, believing the scale still balanced. In the great halls of Thebes or Memphis, scribes painted the symbol of the feather on stone, curved lines, soft as breath. It wasn't there to warn, it was there to remind. The universe might be vast, but its stability depended on fragile things. A word spoken right, a promise kept, a ritual performed even when no one was watching. To live under Ma'at was to believe that kindness and geometry were related, that the way you treated your neighbour could somehow influence the orbit of the sun. And strangely, it worked. For centuries, Egypt did not collapse. Dynasties rose and fell, but the core idea that harmony could outlast chaos remained untouched. Of course, that harmony came with a price. When everyone's peace depends on one man's perfection, the fear of failure never sleeps. You start to see why pharaohs built monuments taller than clouds. Not out of vanity, but out of nervous devotion. You can't risk balance without proof. So they carved stone into prayers, piled up mountains of faith, and covered them in gold so the gods wouldn't miss them. By night, when the priests extinguished the last lamps, the temple cooled to silence. Somewhere in the distance, a scribe's brush still whispered across papyrus, recording the day's rituals, the cosmic minutes of an eternal meeting. And in that stillness you could almost hear the feather fall, perfectly even, perfectly quiet, perfectly balanced. As we drift further into the story, that silence begins to tremble. Because balance, as the pharaohs learned, is never permanent. It must be rebuilt every dawn. One breath, one offering, one trembling hand at a time. You wake before dawn again, though you never really slept. The palace is quiet except for the echo of sandals on polished stone. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Nile exhales, a low whisper of water moving through reeds. Inside, everything smells faintly of cedar oil and ancient linen, as if the air itself has been embalmed for centuries. Servants move like shadows, silent and precise. They do not look directly at you. They kneel, they rise, they wait. You are the centre of this choreography, but not its author. Your life is already written, not in words, but in rituals so old no one remembers who invented them. The priests arrive carrying bowls of scented oil, polished copper mirrors, linen cloths fine enough to vanish in light. Each item has a name, each gesture a prayer. Washing your face is not hygiene, it is renewal. Brushing your hair is not vanity, it is alignment with the order of the heavens. Even breathing too deeply in the wrong moment could be seen as disrespect to the gods who lent you their lungs. They call this preparation the morning rebirth. You, the living sun, must be awakened properly so the actual sun knows to rise. A mistake here would mean confusion above. Somewhere in the sky, Ra himself might pause, wondering whether to begin the day. No one is willing to risk that kind of administrative delay in the universe, so you stand perfectly still while they pour water over your hands. Water carried from the Nile in silver jars, cold enough to sting. It smells faintly of earth and salt. They rub your skin with perfumed oils, whispering hymns as they work. You can feel the chorus of them in the rhythm of your pulse. To an outsider, this might look luxurious. It isn't. It's maintenance. You're not a man being served. You're a god being tuned, like an instrument that must always play the same note. Every robe they place on you, every piece of gold they fasten, these are not clothes or ornaments. They are proof. The kingdom cannot see the sun without its proper frame. Your regalia gleams in the half-light. The crook and flail crossed on your chest, symbols of nurture and punishment. The double crown heavy enough to ache at the temples. The broad collar of turquoise and lapis pressing cool against your skin. The jewels hum softly when you breathe. To wear them is to remember that you belong more to eternity than to yourself. Outside, the first rays of sunlight spill into the courtyard. Trumpets sound. A line of priests begins the daily procession to the temple, their chants low and rhythmic. You follow, each step practiced since birth. The ground beneath your sandals feels smoother than it should, as if the stones themselves are trying not to disturb you. The people line the processional road, heads bowed. They don't cheer, they don't dare. They simply watch, grateful and terrified. To them, you're the wall that keeps chaos out. If you falter, even for a heartbeat, the stars might lose their positions. Somewhere among the crowd, a child glimpses you for the first time. You can see awe flicker across his face. Not joy, not curiosity, but a kind of frightened belief. To him, you're not a person. You're the reason his crops might grow. And you realize, not for the first time, that no one here has ever loved you without worshipping you. The temple swallows you whole. Inside it is cooler, darker, thick with incense. The chanting never stops, it simply changes direction. The walls are alive with hieroglyphs. Flocks of sacred birds frozen mid-flight, hands offering, eyes watching. You can almost hear them whisper. A priest presents you with a tray of food, bread, beer, figs, meat. You pretend to eat. The gods require the illusion of appetite. When you lift a morsel to your lips, the priest behind you quietly removes it to offer again to the statue in the next chamber. Nothing is wasted. Everything is recycled into holiness. When the ceremonies end, you retreat to your chamber, but even solitude is scripted. Servants still hover at the edge of vision, waiting for gestures you never quite decide to make. You could dismiss them, but that too would be an act of significance, so you remain still, a figure carved out of patience. Outside, the city hums. Markets open, craftsmen shout, children chase one another across dusty courtyards. Their laughter reaches your balcony like a language you once spoke, but can no longer translate. You are adored by thousands, but the sound of their lives feels distant, like waves breaking on the far side of eternity. Every so often, a memory slips through. You remember the river as a boy, the rough feel of wet clay in your hands, the smell of bread baking in the street. Then a priest coughs politely, and the moment vanishes. You're a god again, or at least the performance of one. As the sun climbs higher, heat fills the palace. Gold plates on the walls catch the light, throwing it back in scattered fragments. The room glows like the inside of a furnace. You can almost imagine melting into it, becoming pure light, an escape disguised as transcendence. But evening will come, and with it, another ritual. Prayers to guide the sun through the underworld, to ensure it finds its way back by morning. You will repeat the same words that your ancestors spoke, in the same tone, at the same hour, believing that somewhere in those syllables lies the secret to holding the world together for one more night. This is what it means to be Pharaoh, to rule not with armies but with repetition, to survive not through rest but through ritual. The gods may never sleep, but you suspect they do not envy their own endurance. From here, the story opens into the darker edges of that endurance, where devotion meets exhaustion and the divine mask begins to tremble under its own weight. The sun has risen fully now, as if obeying your schedule. Outside, its light spills across the courtyard, touching everything as though to confirm existence. The air shimmers with warmth, not fierce yet, but heavy with promise. Another day in eternity has officially begun. You make your way to the temple, that vast stone organism where gods, priests and politics share a single heartbeat. The walls lean inward slightly, as though the entire structure is inhaling. Every surface gleams with symbols carved so deeply they seem alive. Hieroglyphs march across the columns like disciplined soldiers, frozen mid-prayer. Each one means something precise, but together they hum a language older than sound. The temple is more than a building. It is a universe in miniature. The floor represents the earth's fertile soil. The ceiling above you is the sky, painted deep blue, studded, with golden stars that never move. The columns are bundles of papyrus and lotus, frozen rivers of stone stretching upward toward imagined sunlight. As you walk through the halls, you're not entering a room, you're reenacting creation itself. At the heart of the complex lies the sanctuary, a small chamber sealed from the public eye, cool and dark even at midday. Inside stands the god's image, a statue smaller than you expected, gleaming with gold that has lost none of its warmth over centuries of prayer. To the priests, this statue is not an object. It is a guest, a fragment of divinity taking the day shift in physical form. Your duty is to wake it. The opening of the mouth ceremony begins. The name sounds strange in your own tongue. It is not violent, not literal. It is a symbolic act, a moment when divine senses are restored. You hold a ritual blade shaped like a fish's tail, polished until it reflects your face in rippling distortions. A priest chants behind you, his voice slow and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of stone. You touch the blade to the statue's lips, eyes, and ears, whispering the same ancient phrases that your ancestors once spoke. This, they say, allows the god to see again, to breathe, to eat, to listen. Every morning the divine must be reminded how to exist. It is a comforting thought, in a strange way. Even the gods need gentle supervision. When the ritual ends, servants bring trays of offerings, bread shaped like the sun, beer thick as porridge, fruits, fish, small cuts of roasted meat. You pretend to eat, but the food is not for you. It is for the god, who consumes its essence while the priests later consume the remains. The process keeps everyone nourished in different ways. You wash the statue with perfumed water, dress it in fresh linen, and anoint it with oil. The air grows heavy with the scent, sweet, spicy, and faintly smoky. Myrrh, cinnamon, pine resin, and something darker, like honey left too long in the sun. It clings to your hands, to the walls, to the edges of memory. When the final prayer ends, the doors of the sanctuary close again. The god has been fed, dressed, and returned to silence. The priests bow low and retreat, careful not to turn their backs to the altar. The last one seals the entrance with a strip of wax, pressing a small symbol into it. A single feather, the mark of balance. Outside, light floods the temple courtyard. You step into it, blinking. The sun above feels hotter now, less forgiving. People kneel as you pass, murmuring blessings, some too quietly to hear. You don't stop. You cannot stop. The ritual of daily resurrection is complete, but the day has only begun. Somewhere beyond the walls, life goes on. Traders shout in markets, potters shape wet clay, fishermen pull nets from the river. They believe that their work is ordinary and yours divine. You know it's the same. You build, maintain, repeat, and hope the structure doesn't collapse. They sweat for bread. You sweat for the sun. The difference is paperwork. Later, in the cool corridors of the palace, you remove the crown. The weight leaves a faint ache along your forehead. For a moment, you think you feel lighter, freer, but then the echo of chanting drifts through the open window. The priests are beginning the noon hymns. The cycle resumes as it always does. The Egyptians called this endless repetition eternity in motion. It sounds poetic until you live it. The comfort of stability slowly becomes the exhaustion of predictability. There is no room for surprise in perfection. Even joy must be scheduled. Sometimes you wonder if the gods ever grow tired of being gods. Does Ra, the sun, ever wish to stay below the horizon just a little longer? Does Osiris, Lord of the Dead, ever crave silence after so many centuries of judgment? You cannot ask them. You only echo their patterns. To doubt the ritual is to doubt reality itself. Evening comes gently over Thebes. The light softens, turning the river to liquid bronze. The temple door closes again. Offerings are gathered, songs fade into hums. You stand at the balcony, watching the horizon where the sun sinks into the same haze it rose from. The world has completed another perfect circle. Down below, the workers sweep the temple floors, wiping away the traces of incense ash and scattered petals. Tomorrow morning, they will scatter fresh ones again. The same rhythm, the same gestures, the same conviction that if you stop, even once, everything might unravel. It's a strange kind of faith, one that doesn't wait for miracles but insists on maintenance. Creation, after all, doesn't happen once. It happens every morning. The air cools, the sky turns violet. Somewhere, a priest whispers a final blessing, asking the night to treat you kindly. For a brief moment, you feel something close to peace. Not freedom, but rest disguised as obedience. The path now carries us toward what happens when this order begins to tremble, when devotion deepens into obsession, and even the gods themselves start to wonder how much eternity a human being can bear. The palace looks peaceful from a distance. Its walls rise pale and gleaming above the river, surrounded by gardens where papyrus rustles and fountains whisper. But step closer, and the quiet becomes something else. Not serenity, but watchfulness. The air itself seems to listen. Here, family is not a private matter. It is a branch of government, a living theology. Every relationship has the weight of law, and every birth is a sacred event carefully planned, prayed for, and audited by priests. The pharaoh may be divine, but he does not live alone. Around him, the royal household hums like a hive of gold-draped bees, loyal, beautiful, and slightly dangerous. You walk through a corridor where the air smells faintly of frankincense and polished limestone. The floor cools your bare feet. On either side, carved columns bloom into lotus flowers, frozen mid-blossom. Behind one curtain, a scribe whispers a list of names: queens, concubines, half-brothers, daughters, nephews, and priests. Each name carries an invisible calculation: lineage, legitimacy, usefulness. This is not a family, it is a dynasty rehearsing its own immortality. The main queen, often called the Great Royal Wife, stands at the centre of this celestial diagram. She is the public mirror of her husband's divinity. When she smiles at festivals, the crowd believes the goddess Hathor is pleased. When she bears a son, priests sing that the sun itself has renewed its light, yet she too must play her part carefully. Behind the painted eyes and perfume lies the constant reminder that affection is policy. Concubines are part of the same machinery, each chosen for lineage, diplomacy or beauty. They live within the palace like perfumed chess pieces, silent, adorned, and replaceable. Their presence keeps the bloodline divined but dangerously close. Daughters marry brothers, nieces marry uncles. The logic is simple. Gods should not mix with mortals. The result is more complicated. The same features repeating generation after generation, like an echo that forgets the original voice. Modern light has read those echoes in their bones. The faces carved on tomb walls, high cheekbones, narrow jaws, turn out to be family portraits more accurate than anyone expected. Some bodies tell stories the priest never intended to record. Limbs slightly twisted, skulls misshaped by inheritance. But to the Egyptians, these were not flaws. They were proof of purity. The gods, they believed, always looked a little strange. You pass a small room where nurses tend to royal children. The scent of milk and honey fills the air. A boy plays with a wooden toy shaped like a lion, its mane painted in faded ochre. He will one day wear the double crown and learn that play is preparation. For now, he only knows that the lion's paint rubs off on his fingers. In another chamber, older sons debate loudly, voices sharp, laughter forced. A servant glances nervously at the door, aware that too much enthusiasm might sound like ambition. Everyone here wants to serve eternity, but no one wants to be written out of it. You begin to see how power becomes delicate when everyone shares the same blood. The pharaoh is both father and employer, husband and high priest. His word can bless or erase. His silence can mean protection or punishment. Even affection must be scheduled between ceremonies. The queen's quarters smell of lotus and myrrh. She reclines on a low couch, her skin dusted with gold powder that gleams under lamplight. Around her neck, amulets shaped like tiny scarabs glitter as if breathing. Her ladies-in-waiting whisper poetry and gossip, stories of distant kingdoms, of queens who fell from grace, of marriages arranged like diplomatic treaties. Every rumour here travels faster than the Nile's current. In one corner, a musician plucks a harp strung with gut strings. The sound is soft, hesitant, as though afraid to disturb the gods listening through the ceiling. The queen listens, eyes half closed. It might look like peace, but you sense something heavier, a loneliness that smells faintly of perfume. Even love in this world wears a crown. As the day wanes, the palace changes temperature. The coolness of morning fades into the sticky heat of late afternoon. Servants fan the air with palm fronds. Outside the city hums, inside the courtyards darken into shade. Somewhere a priest chants blessings over a newborn daughter, another name added to the divine family tree, another line drawn in the circle of eternity. Because in Egypt the family tree rarely branched. It curled inward, like a serpent eating its own tail. The intention was sacred continuity. The result was delicate repetition. The body remembered patterns that were never meant to repeat, and each generation inherited not just crowns and temples, but the silent pressure to look like gods, think like gods, and marry as gods did, within the walls of perfection. Still, there were moments of tenderness. A father bending down to lift a child during a festival. A mother leaving a toy beside a tomb for a son who had gone ahead. Love found its way through the cracks of ceremony, soft as the light that seeps between the stones. As night approaches, lamps flicker in the corridors. The walls glow like the inside of amber. The pharaoh's family gathers for the evening meal, a quiet affair eaten beneath painted ceilings of stars. Bread, roasted fowl, sweet wine, laughter whispered through the lens of etiquette. The gods are always watching, so even amusement must look divine. The pharaoh sits at the head of the table, his children arranged like constellations around him. The great wife smiles, serene. A concubine plucks grapes, pretending not to envy her. A scribe records the scene, because every gesture is a document of eternity. You realize that this family is not living, they are performing. Each smile, each glance, each carefully phrased compliment is part of the ongoing project to keep the divine machine running. Their hearts may ache, their minds may wander, but the story allows no improvisation. Keeping divinity pure meant the family tree was more like a circle, and like all circles, it could be beautiful until it began to tighten. If we follow the thread a little further, we step quietly into the darker side of that circle, where affection becomes rivalry, and holiness learns to whisper behind locked doors. Night comes differently inside the palace. Outside, Thebes hums with drums and the murmur of markets winding down. Inside, time slows until even breath feels ceremonial. Lamps flicker against the columns, shadows stretch, and servants walk softly as if the air itself could shatter. Somewhere deep within these corridors, a plot begins to breathe. It starts not with shouts or swords, but with murmurs. Women whisper behind curtains of linen embroidered with blue lotuses. A servant pauses outside the door, pretending to adjust a lamp, listening. The conversation is low, careful, and strange in tone. Not gossip, but arithmetic. They are calculating risk, lineage, and opportunity. At the centre of this quiet arithmetic is one woman, Tiye, a secondary queen of Pharaoh Rameses III. Her son, Pentoa, is not first in line to the throne. In most stories that would mean peace. But in Egypt, where gods could not retire, patience often turned poisonous. Tiye has watched her husband age, watched advisors circle him like kites, watched her own child grow into a man who must bow forever. The thought becomes unbearable. The plan becomes logical. She gathers allies, a steward who feels underpaid, a guard who drinks too often, a magician whose career has fallen from royal favour. They write notes on small scraps of papyrus, rolled tight like the petals of dying flowers. The ink smells of lamp soot and wine. When one message is finished, it's slipped into a basket of figs bound for another chamber. A gesture of generosity, or treason wearing perfume. To understand how this could happen, you must imagine the palace not as marble strength, but as a web. Everyone is connected by favours, debts, secrets. Even the divine have paperwork. Each prayer offered to the pharaoh passes through human hands first, and hands can be bribed. For months, the plot grows like mould beneath polished stone. Magicians write spells of confusion meant to cloud the minds of the royal guards. Servants rehearse who will unlock which doors and when. The conspirators promise one another riches, freedom, or justice, depending on what each needs to hear. Their confidence feels invincible until the day someone hesitates. In Egypt, secrets last as long as loyalty, and loyalty is always afraid. The surviving records call it the harem conspiracy. The name sounds grand, but the reality was intimate and terrible. A handful of people whispering in rooms that smelled of jasmine and fear. The plan was simple. During a festival, while the pharaoh attended ceremonies, Tia's supporters would strike. Her son would emerge as the new ruler, the divine order renewed through a change of paperwork. Even betrayal here wore ritual robes. But somewhere, perhaps in a moment of guilt or drunkenness, someone talked. A letter was intercepted. Priests informed the guards. The festival went on as planned, but beneath the music there was tension sharp enough to taste. The air itself seemed to watch. The plotters moved too late. Soldiers stepped from the shadows before the knife ever touched the king. The trial that followed was written on a papyrus now brittle and cracked, an official record of the day the gods admitted how human they were. The pharaoh's judges sat beneath painted ceilings, their faces solemn, their words rehearsed. Witnesses were questioned, confessions recorded, punishments noted in careful, elegant handwriting. Each suspect was called by number, not by name, as if anonymity could make the story cleaner. T's fate was sealed quickly. She vanished from the record, a polite historical silence. Her son, Pentuer, was found guilty of treason against the living God. The scribes did not describe the sentence in detail. They merely wrote that he took his own life. The phrasing is soft, but the truth was not. When archaeologists later unwrapped his body, they found his mouth open wide, as though he had died mid-breath. The linen around his neck told the rest of the story. As for Rameses III, the records claim divine justice was done, that the god-king lived on. For centuries that version stood unchallenged. Only when modern light slid through the wrappings of his mummy did another truth appear. The scan revealed a deep cut across the throat, clean, deliberate, final. A wound hidden beneath resin and ceremony for 3,000 years. Even gods, it seemed, had a pulse that could be cut. You imagine the moment of discovery, the glow of a medical lamp reflecting off ancient bandages, the faint hiss of machinery, the hush of astonished voices. One scientist whispers what priests once dared not say, that the pharaoh died not in divine tranquility, but by a human hand. Yet the irony holds steady. The system that allowed his murder also preserved his body perfectly. Betrayal failed to end him. It only froze him in time. Back in the palace, centuries before the scan, silence falls again. The priests cleanse the halls with smoke and chant, sealing the walls against further misfortune. The surviving concubines are moved to distant estates. Servants are replaced, scribes promoted or punished. On the surface, order returns. The gods are still in charge. But the air of the palace never smells the same again. There is always a trace of burnt oil, faint but lingering. The scent of fear disguised as incense. Some say Tiye's ghost still wanders the corridors, whispering her case to anyone who will listen. Others say her spirit rests beside her son, still plotting in the dark for a justice that never quite came. Perhaps both are true. Egypt was never a country that believed in simple endings. When you look at the mummy of Rameses III today, lying under museum lights, his expression seems peaceful, but if you lean close enough, you might notice how tightly the bandages cross his throat, how the embalmer's resin pools in that small, precise line. It glistens faintly under glass, like a secret that refuses to stay buried. Divine right doesn't stop a bad family meeting. And in Egypt, where gods ruled as humans, family meetings lasted forever. From here, the story opens into another kind of power, not the whispered plots of courtiers, but the visible strength of queens who refused to disappear. You would think that living as a god's wife might bring freedom, but in Egypt, even divine women were expected to orbit the throne, never to sit upon it. And yet, some refused to remain satellites. They reached for the center of the sun. They rewrote the script that men had carved in stone. Power in Egypt had a gender, and that gender wore a crown. But for a few remarkable centuries, women found the language to bend that rule, not by rebellion, but by elegance, persuasion, and art. Their weapons were perfume, politics, and the control of mirrors. The first great queen to break silence was Hatshepsut. Her name meant foremost of noble ladies, which sounds polite until you realize she meant it literally. She began as the great wife of Pharaoh Thutmose II, then quietly became co-ruler and finally took full power in her own right. The priests hesitated, the courtiers blinked, and Hatshepsut simply kept ruling until disbelief grew tired. She understood that Egypt valued symbols more than faces, so she reshaped hers. In her statues, she appears with the broad chest and beard of a king, not as disguise, but as translation. If the world could not imagine a woman pharaoh, she would give them something they could imagine, the idea of authority itself. The beard was not deception, it was grammar. Under her reign, Egypt blossomed. Trade ships sailed south to the land of incense, returning with gold, ebony, and baboons that danced at festivals. Temples rose in perfect alignment with the sun, and the people called her Beloved of Amun, Mother of Prosperity. For 2 decades, balance held. Then, after her death, her stepson took a chisel and began the slow work of erasing her. Her face was hammered from reliefs, her cartouches scratched away. To the living, that meant justice. To history, it meant proof. You don't erase what doesn't threaten you. Centuries later, another woman took the throne, not by war but by charisma. Her name was Nefertiti. The beautiful one has come. She and her husband Akhenaten built a new city in honor of one god, the sun disk, Aten, abandoning the old temples, the old priesthood, and the old patience of tradition. For a brief moment, Egypt turned its face toward light. Nefertiti wasn't merely decoration beside her husband. In carvings, she stands equal in size and gesture. She offers to the gods, commands servants, and sometimes, astonishingly, strikes enemies. Her portraits are serene, but her policies were revolutionary. She understood image as diplomacy. Every time the people looked upon her symmetrical face, they were invited to believe in a new order, a world where beauty itself could be holy. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The city of Akhetaten fell silent. Statues were broken, names erased, prayers returned to old gods. Some said she died, others said she ruled alone for a time, disguised under a different name. Whatever the truth, her face survived. A painted bust found buried in dust, its skin still glowing after 3,000 years. The paint has cracked, but the gaze remains alive, calm, unbothered by the collapse of everything it once represented. Centuries rolled onward, and Egypt changed its language, its gods, its rulers, but another queen stepped out of history with the same poise. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, ruled when Egypt was already fading into Rome's shadow. She was not Egyptian by blood, but by choice, learning the language, performing the rituals, reviving the old magic of divine kingship one last time. Her intelligence frightened people more than her beauty ever could. She spoke several tongues, negotiated with empires, and turned diplomacy into theatre. When she met Julius Caesar, she arrived rolled in a carpet, not as a seductress, but as a strategist who understood the power of surprise. Later, when Rome sent armies, she met them not as prey, but as performance. Sails dyed purple, silver oars catching the sun, perfumes drifting across the water so strong that sailors claimed to smell her before they saw her. Every gesture, every appearance was deliberate. Cleopatra ruled not only Egypt but imagination itself, and though history later painted her in Roman ink as temptress, manipulator, downfall, she remains one of the few rulers who lost an empire yet kept her myth intact. You can almost see the thread connecting them. Hatshepsut carving her name into silence, Nefertiti turning light into faith, Cleopatra weaving language and love into survival. 3 women separated by centuries, all refusing to vanish. Each one used the tools allowed to her, architecture, art, charm, and turned them into strategies for eternity. The scent of malachite coal still lingers in tomb paintings. The green dust was ground from stone, mixed with oil and brushed around the eyes not for vanity but protection, from glare, from disease, from judgment. But perhaps it also served another purpose. Perhaps it was war paint for women who fought their battles through patience instead of swords. It's easy to forget that their reigns were brief, fragile intervals between the long reigns of men, yet their impact endures precisely because of that fragility. When power cannot be shouted, it learns to whisper. When it cannot command, it learns to endure. And you realise as you walk through museum halls lined with their faces that they were never erased. Time simply took a few centuries to remember them. The chisels that once struck their names from walls have become part of their legend. Every scratch, every crack is another way of being seen. The light falls softly on their images. Stone eyes rimmed with colour, lips curved in composure. They are still watching, still unafraid. It turns out divine femininity needed great public relations, and it succeeded. Thousands of years later, we're still reading the campaign. Our quiet exploration now turns to the other side of legacy. The sons, the heirs, and the unspoken terror of succession, where immortality begins to feel like inheritance overdue. Power, in Egypt, was supposed to be eternal, but eternity, it turns out, has scheduling problems. Sooner or later, even gods must retire, or rather, die publicly and efficiently, so that another god can rise without the sun noticing. Succession was meant to be a peaceful handover, a divine relay race. The living king represented Horus, the god of the sky. The dead king became Osiris, lord of the underworld. The new pharaoh was the resurrected Horus once more, and so the cosmic wheel kept turning. It was elegant in theory, a circle too perfect to fail. But circles, when you live inside them, can start to feel like cages. For the heir waiting in the palace, immortality was not inspiration. It was delay. He watched his father, or his uncle, or sometimes both, preside over ceremonies year after year, repeating the same gestures, the same blessings, the same lines of divinity that no one dared edit. Each sunrise meant another day of obedience. Each ritual was a reminder that the throne was both his destiny and his denial. Imagine being a prince in a world where patience is a virtue and ambition is treason. You wake to the sound of drums announcing prayers you will never lead. You eat at the table of a man you are fated to replace, but cannot hope to surpass. You study the rituals, learn the hymns, practice the way to hold the crook and flail, knowing all the while that to perform too well would be suspicious. Even affection was a risk. Fathers were gods, sons were apprentices, and love had to share a table with politics. Some heirs were adored, others quietly erased. In a system where blood equaled legitimacy, death became the most reliable form of promotion. When pharaohs died, the transition had to be instant. Delay meant chaos. The funeral priests moved with professional urgency, one team handling the body, another the successor. While the old god was being wrapped in resin and linen, the new one was rehearsing how to smile like eternity. The scent of embalming oil mingled with the ink of new decrees. You can almost hear the rhythm of it, the tapping of chisels carving a new name into walls while the old one was still cooling in the tomb. The sound must have been oddly comforting to the scribes, proof that the world still worked, that Ma'at, the balance of things, had survived another round of mortality. But sometimes it didn't work. Some heirs never made it to the throne. Sekenenretar, a ruler from the Theban line, carried scars that told a story older than his name. His skull, found centuries later, bears the marks of battle. Deep, sharp, deliberate. The blows came from above, perhaps as he knelt. His death ended a war, but also began a dynasty. His body became both message and warning. Power could change hands through ceremony or through the edge of a weapon. Others inherited more quietly but carried their family's mistakes in their bones. Tutankhamun, the child king, bore the accumulated echo of generations of sacred inbreeding. His spine curved like a question mark, his leg twisted, his step uncertain. Modern researchers, peering through the linen with beams of gentle light, saw fractures not from battle, but from fragility. The bloodline had looped too many times around itself. It's tempting to pity him. a boy crowned too early, burdened by divine paperwork he could barely lift. But he tried. He reopened temples his heretical father had closed, restored gods to their altars, smiled for statues that would outlive him. When he died, still a teenager, his funeral became the Empire's apology to itself, the great show of continuity masking exhaustion. Inside his tomb they placed everything a god might need: food, jewellery, chariots, toys, even the scent of lilies painted on the wall. The air inside must have been thick with oil and resin, heavy and sweet. The priest spoke the words that turned death into departure, sealing the chamber like a sigh. But fate, as always, found a sense of irony. Thousands of years later, when the tomb was opened, the first thing the explorer saw was not his face, but his name, repeated over and over in gold, as if to remind the living who had finally won the game of waiting. The boy who was supposed to fade into lineage had become the only pharaoh everyone remembers. And yet, behind all the grandeur, you can still hear the sound of that question mark, the unspoken anxiety that haunts every dynasty. What if eternity depends on people who never get to live a normal life? What if the price of balance is never resting, never choosing, never changing? To the Egyptians, succession was sacred choreography. To the pharaohs, it was inheritance wrapped in fear. Each one knew that behind him stood a son or brother rehearsing the same gestures, waiting for the same crown. No wonder their monuments grew taller, their names longer, their claims louder. They weren't competing with enemies, they were competing with ghosts who shared their faces. In the long corridors of the Valley of the Kings, where their tombs line up like punctuation marks in a story too long to read aloud, you can almost feel them, each king trying to outlast the echo of the one before. The hieroglyphs shimmer under torchlight, telling the same story in 1,000 variations: birth, power, death, rebirth. A cycle carved so carefully that no one dared question whether it was worth repeating. Somewhere in that endless loop of devotion, the human heart still beat, fragile, anxious, and terribly aware that it would one day be weighed against a feather. In Egypt, job security ended exactly at mummification, and even then, replacements were already being trained. As we drift further into the story, the heartbeats grow quieter, the body begins to cool. The rituals that built a kingdom turn inward now, into the art of preservation, where chemistry becomes poetry and death learns how to smell like eternity. The body lies on a table of smooth stone, its outline soft beneath linen. The room around it is silent except for the slow drip of oil and the faint hiss of burning incense. Somewhere beyond the wall the river moves, a whisper of life to remind the dead where they came from. Inside, the air is cool and dense, heavy with purpose. This is the beginning of forever. To the Egyptians, death was never an ending. It was a complicated relocation. The body was a house, and the soul its tenant. When the body failed, the soul didn't die. It simply needed a better address. The embalmers were not undertakers, but architects, rebuilding flesh into eternity's most durable property. They called their place of work the House of Beauty. It sounds peaceful, and perhaps it was. The workers moved carefully, chanting as they mixed oils, ground spices, and heated resins, until the air shimmered with their fragrance. What modern people might call chemistry, they understood as prayer. The process began with cleansing. Water drawn from the Nile was poured gently over the body, its chill carrying away the dust of life. Then came the removal of what could decay too quickly. The embalmers worked with quiet precision, guided by ritual more than anatomy. They reached within and took out what the gods themselves were said to have designed. The heart was left untouched, for it was the seat of memory and conscience. The other organs were placed in small carved jars, each guarded by a spirit. To the Egyptians, this was not dissection, it was delegation. Next came the long drying. The body was buried in powdery crystals of salt drawn from desert lakes. Natron, they called it, a mixture that hissed softly as it pulled away moisture. For 40 days and nights, the body rested like bread rising without heat, slowly becoming lighter, purer, closer to permanence. The embalmers visited daily, checking for signs of imbalance. A priest might whisper a spell of reassurance. A servant might replace a handful of salt. The air filled with the clean, sharp smell of minerals, half desert, half memory. When the skin felt like parchment and the shape of the face returned, the real artistry began. The dried body was washed again, polished with oils pressed from cedar and lotus. The smell was warm, almost sweet, like sunlight soaked into wood. Then came the wrapping. Strips of linen, each one blessed, each one bearing small charms and prayers, were wound carefully from the feet upward. Hundreds of layers formed a cocoon that whispered when touched. Between them, the embalmers slid amulets, small beetles of green stone, golden eyes of protection, words of power folded in papyrus. You might imagine this as clinical, but it was closer to music. Each wrapping had its rhythm, each knot its beat. A priest recited the same lines again and again until they turned from sound into texture. The body that began as clay of the earth ended as fabric of the cosmos. By the time the final band was tied, it no longer looked like a person. It looked like a thought, neat, symmetrical, and prepared to last. Resin was brushed over the linen, dark and glossy, sealing it like amber. The scent of it filled the chamber, pine, bitumen, honey, smoke. It clung to the hair of the living and followed them home. They would carry that fragrance for days, a reminder that even mortality had a smell. When the work was done, the chief embalmer, wearing the mask of Anubis, touched the mummy's lips with a bronze blade. The gesture was small but sacred. It reopened the mouth so the soul could speak again, breathe again, eat, drink, and call its name across the boundary of death. The act had a name. The opening of the mouth. It was the echo of birth, performed backward. And then, for the first time in weeks, the embalmer stepped back. What lay before them was not decay, but design. A perfect stillness meant to outlast weather, dynasty, and disbelief. Around it, they placed everything it might need. Linen clothes, sandals, combs, bread, jars of wine, and sometimes a favourite pet wrapped in matching layers. Even eternity, it seemed, benefited from good company. The priests recited one final hymn, their voices rising and falling like the tide of the river outside. In that rhythm, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the civilization itself, orderly, repetitive, soothing. Each word carried the same promise. You will not be forgotten, you will not be lost, you will wake again. For us, this sounds poetic. For them, it was practical, a contract written in fragrance and faith. The resin kept the insects out, the salt stopped the rot, the linen protected the name. To modern science, that's preservation. To them, it was resurrection. The difference is only in vocabulary. Even now, when one of these bodies is opened under museum lights, the smell drifts out. Faint but unmistakable. Cedar, myrrh, something like aged honey. A scent that has crossed 3,000 years without fading. It smells not of death, but of someone trying very hard to live forever. You realise that mummification was never about fear. It was about continuity. The same kind of maintenance that once made the sun rise now applied to the human body. To die properly was to participate in the universe's repair, and in a way it worked. The faces of the pharaohs, the priests, even the servants who prepared them, all still exist, their expressions calm, their skin pale but intact. The gods they worshipped may have fallen silent, but their craft endured. Every wrinkle and fold of linen is a sentence that time forgot to erase. Immortality, it seems, was just skincare taken very seriously. From here, the story glides deeper into the quiet chambers where those mummified bodies would rest, into the architecture built not for the living, but for memory itself, time, phase. The tomb waits at the edge of the desert, half mountain, half memory. From a distance, it looks like silence carved into stone. Up close, it hums, not with sound, but with purpose. Every wall, every corridor, every measured angle serves one instruction. Continue. You step into its cool shadow and feel the temperature fall. The air smells faintly of chalk, resin, and something older than dust. Torches flicker against walls covered in colour that refuses to fade. Blues as deep as midnight, reds still sharp as dried flowers. Each surface tells a story. A king walking beside the sun, offering bread to gods, crossing rivers of stars. The walls are busy, but the room is calm. The Egyptians built eternity to be quiet. A tomb was never just a resting place. It was a machine built to manage the traffic between this world and the next. The pharaoh did not plan to lie still. He planned to travel. The walls were maps, the sarcophagus an engine, the offerings spare fuel. The priests called it the house of millions of years, which is simply another way of saying forever with maintenance included. The design began with geometry and faith braided together. The shape of the pyramid or the angle of a corridor wasn't decorative. It followed the path of the sun, the North Star, or the invisible line that the soul would take as it rose. What looks to us like architecture was to them choreography. Light, air, and shadow rehearsed the journey of the spirit long before the body arrived. In the royal tombs, the ceilings were painted as night skies filled with constellations and prayers. The walls repeated the same formulas again and again, not to impress, but to remind. The Egyptians believed words were alive. Carving them into stone was the safest way to make sure they remembered their job. Each sentence was a spell of navigation. Go forward, pass safely, become light. Even the floor carried meaning. The lowest chambers symbolized the underworld, while the upper passages mimic the world of the living. When the funeral procession descended, it was more than ceremony. It was the soul's rehearsal for its real descent. The echoes of footsteps in those corridors still sound like practice for eternity. At the far end of the tomb waited the sarcophagus, the vessel of return. Cut from granite so dense that modern tools still struggle to shape it, it gleamed under lamplight like frozen water. Its sides were covered with prayers, its lid so heavy that it took days to position. When closed, it did not imprison the body. It sealed the energy needed to rise again. Inside, the mummy rested like a seed, folded in linen soil, waiting for divine weather. You might picture the scene on burial day. Priests in leopard skin robes chant through incense smoke. Musicians play harps and flutes that sound more like sighs than songs. The air glows orange from torches. The family weeps softly, not as farewell, but as encouragement. Go, safely, they whisper, and come back in the morning. The words drift into the stone and stay there. They're probably still echoing. After the last hymn, the entrance is sealed. Workers stack limestone blocks, plaster the joints, paint the symbols that lock the curse and keep the blessing. The desert wind smooths the ground until the doorway disappears. To those above, the world moves on. To those below, it never will. Inside that stillness, the tomb begins its work. Candles go out, and darkness takes over the task of preservation. Air dries, salt hardens, the linen cocoon stays tight. The scent of oil and resin fades, replaced by the steady neutrality of time. Yet, the Egyptians believed this quiet wasn't death, it was incubation. The Book of the Dead, a collection of prayers placed beside the mummy, reads less like religion and more like an instruction manual. The soul must identify itself, prove innocence, avoid traps, and navigate gates guarded by things with too many heads. The test at the end is the most famous, the weighing of the heart. In a chamber beyond the living world, the heart of the deceased is placed on a scale against a single feather, the symbol of Mayat and truth and balance. If the heart is light, the soul moves forward into the field of reeds, a paradise where the air always smells of harvest and no one ever grows old. If heavy, it is eaten by a creature part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, a diet plan no one wanted. Even this final judgment was comforting. The Egyptians didn't fear it. They prepared for it like an exam with open notes. They filled tombs with everything that might help: songs, maps, diagrams, and occasionally a backup copy of the heart's confession. In their universe, failure was not tragedy but poor planning. Walk deeper into any tomb, and you feel that planning's still at work. The deeper chambers are narrow, as if the rock itself is trying to remember how to breathe. The hieroglyphs grow smaller, more intimate. Less proclamation, more diary. You see scenes of fishing, feasting, sleeping, sailing. Ordinary pleasures the soul expected to resume once promoted to eternity. The Pharaohs, it seems, wanted paradise to look comfortingly like home. Even now, under artificial lights and glass, the colours on those walls remain stubbornly bright. The blue of the ceilings has not turned to dust. The gold still catches light as though waiting for the next dawn. You realise these people didn't build tombs to keep death out. They built them to make sure life never forgot to come back in. The air in the burial chamber feels thicker. Every step echoes longer than it should. For a moment, you understand why the builders sealed themselves in when their work was done. A superstition maybe, or an act of devotion, or simply the human desire to see what they'd made from the inside one last time. You stand in the quiet and listen. It feels less like being underground and more like standing inside a heartbeat. You studied your whole life for a test graded by a crocodile. But in the hush of this place you realise the Egyptians never expected perfection. They expected continuity, the grace of repetition. Death was not punishment. It was procedure. If we follow the thread a little further, the story shifts again, from the stillness of the tomb to the strange mercy that replaced blood with clay, when the practice of sacrifice gave way to invention, and humanity learned to let magic work over time instead of the living. The tombs of the first kings were crowded, not only with treasures and food, but with people. In the earliest dynasties, when power was still learning how to behave, loyalty didn't end with breath. Servants, guards, and concubines were expected to follow their ruler into eternity the hard way, by dying when he did. To modern minds, it sounds impossible. But to the Egyptians of the early world, it felt logical. If the pharaoh was a god on earth, he would need a household in heaven. Who else could pour wine, fan air, or sing the songs that kept the night polite? Death, in those days, was simply relocation. The faithful staff were expected to continue their shifts on the other side. Archaeologists at Abydos once uncovered one of these royal burials. Around the king's chamber they found hundreds of smaller graves, men, women, even animals, all placed neatly in rows. There were no signs of struggle. Many lay with jewellery still on their arms, their faces calm. Perhaps they drank a potion. Perhaps they believed too deeply to fear. The sand had preserved their order perfectly, a silent audience arranged around their absent master. Standing in that ancient desert, you can almost feel the logic that shaped such devotion. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a civilization practicing continuity without imagination. They simply hadn't yet invented metaphor. If eternity required servants, then real servants would do. But the human heart, even under divine instruction, grows uneasy. Somewhere between the first and middle kingdoms, a new thought began to flicker. Maybe symbols could do the work instead. Clay was plentiful, so were prayers. Artisans started moulding tiny figures, sometimes from stone, sometimes from wood, sometimes from blue-green faience that shimmered like river water in sunlight. These were the shabti or ushabti, small helpers meant to come alive when called. Their bodies were inscribed with a single spell, a short and practical promise. If I am summoned to work in the afterlife, let this figure answer in my place. It was the world's earliest form of automation, magic outsourcing. The priests didn't put it that way, of course. They spoke of grace, not convenience. But the idea was the same, a divine labour force with excellent attendance records and no need for wages. Each figure held a miniature hoe or basket, ready for field work in the eternal kingdom. Some pharaohs filled their tombs with hundreds, one for every day of the year, plus supervisors to keep them motivated. When you look at them now in museum cases, their faces are identical. Patient, expressionless, eternally employed. This invention changed everything. The living no longer had to die for their kings. The tomb became less crowded, but more precise. Death turned from tragedy into administration. The gods apparently approved. In this small evolution, you can feel the Egyptian genius for turning necessity into poetry. They never abandoned their rituals. They reinterpreted them. The same faith that once demanded sacrifice now demanded craftsmanship. The artisans who shaped the Shabti did so with reverence. Each curve of clay, each carved hieroglyph, was a small rebellion against cruelty disguised as devotion. You can picture the workshop, clay dust floating in sunlight, the slow scrape of tools, bowls of pigment ground from copper and sand. The air smells of smoke and damp earth. An old man bends over his work, his fingers stained blue-green. He's not building toys, he's building replacements for grief. When the work is done, the figurines are carried to the tomb wrapped in linen. They're placed near the mummy, lined up like a company of polite soldiers waiting for orders. A priest recites the activation spell, voice echoing off the stone. The words are not loud, but they have a kind of resonance that clings to the air. Awaken when called, speak when spoken to, work when summoned, sleep when free. Then the tomb is sealed, and centuries pass. Today, when the sand gives up one of these small figures, it still holds traces of fingerprints pressed into its back. Marks of hands long vanished. Each one is about the length of a hand, light enough to balance on a palm. If you tilt it, the glaze catches the light like rippling water. The promise still shines through. Work done so the living could rest. In this shift from blood to symbol lies something deeply human. The Egyptians didn't lose faith, they gained imagination. They realised that ideas could carry weight where bodies no longer needed to. The world didn't have to be literal to be true. It's easy to laugh, tiny workers in a magical afterlife factory, but there's tenderness in it too. These people built comfort out of clay, turning fear into something small enough to hold. They accepted death, but they refused to accept loneliness. Even the pharaoh, buried with hundreds of Shabti, must have felt relief. His journey beyond the horizon would be crowded but gentle, accompanied not by screams, but by the quiet clatter of small figurines carrying baskets through dreamlike fields. If you listen closely in the stillness of a museum at night, you might imagine hearing them again, a soft rhythmic sound like hundreds of tiny hands tending invisible crops. When humanity learned to let magic work over time, compassion followed. And that compassion, in its humble form, may be the most enduring monument Egypt ever built. From here, the story drifts upward into sunlight again, to the men who built the pharaohs' monuments, the workers who shaped eternity with calloused hands, and the first humans in history to go on strike against heaven itself. From a distance, the pyramids still look effortless, clean lines against a burning sky, angles so precise they might have been measured by light itself. But step closer, and you realise eternity was built with blisters. Every smooth surface hides a million hammer strikes. Every block of stone has fingerprints pressed into its underside. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh's tomb was the heart of the world, the place where heaven and earth met in agreement. But no god lifted those stones. Men did, tens of thousands of them sweating through tunics, coughing in dust, their laughter and curses carried on the desert wind. They were not slaves, as myths once said. They were labourers, farmers during the flood season when the fields lay under water, drafted into royal service by duty and pride. The pharaoh fed them bread, onions and beer strong enough to make obedience tolerable. Each man worked 8 or 10 hours beneath a sun that seemed determined to watch. The worksite was a city unto itself, rows of mud brick houses, bakeries that burned day and night, storehouses filled with jars of beer and salted fish. The smell must have been overwhelming. Yeast, sweat, ash and ambition. A historian once said the pyramids were built on calories and faith. Both were renewable, but neither was free. In the mornings, the workers gathered by teams, gangs, as the records call them, each with a name designed to amuse the gods. One group called themselves the Drunkards of Menkora, another the Friends of Khufu. They sang while they pulled ropes, jokes rising above the rhythm of stone. Humour, even here, survived the heat. Imagine the rhythm of it. Ropes creaking, levers straining, sand crunching under bare feet. Every few minutes a foreman shouts, a team grunts in answer. A block shifts slightly forward. Then comes the collective breath, the sigh of hundreds of bodies catching the same exhaustion. In that sound, eternity begins to take shape. At midday they rest in the shade of half-finished walls. Bread broken in silence, sweat dripping onto the sand, the taste of grit in every bite. Someone tells a story about a friend who dreamed of Osiris offering him cold water. Everyone laughs because that's what thirst does. It turns faith into comedy. By evening they return to their camp, muscles stiff, eyes full of dust. The sky over the desert turns violet, the first stars trembling into view. Fires burn low. They drink, sing, and trade small victories. Who moved the largest block? Who found a lost amulet in the sand? They joke about gods who never sweat. For every monument that still stands, countless hands have vanished. They left behind no statues, only graffiti, carved doodles on walls hidden from ceremony. One reads, "We drank beer, we lifted stone, we were happy." Another, "No one tells the pharaoh we're out of onions." These are the voices of people who believed in immortality but still needed lunch. Archaeologists found their graves near the pyramids, simple but cared for, laid out with amulets, bread and jars of beer. It seems someone loved them enough to bury them properly. The same civilization that raised gods in stone also paused to give its workers a small permanent kindness. Eternity apparently made room for everyone, yet even paradise has payroll problems. At Deir el-Medina, centuries later, the royal tomb builders did something extraordinary. They went on strike. It was the first recorded labour protest in history. The workers stopped chiselling, sat down outside the temple, and demanded their rations of bread and beer. The scribe who recorded it did so in careful handwriting, as if unsure whether the gods approved. But the message was simple. We are hungry. The pharaoh's overseers debated, apologised, delivered the food, and the workers returned to carving the afterlife. Civilization, for a brief moment, had remembered to feed itself. The irony is elegant. The men who built eternity also invented complaint. They worshipped order, but they trusted fairness more. When the stones grew too heavy and the stomach too empty, they dared to remind the divine machine that it still ran on human fuel. Think of them standing in the torchlight, their faces streaked with dust, their hands raw. They did not see themselves as rebels. They were simply doing what the pharaoh himself did every morning, maintaining balance. Ma'at, the principle of order, was supposed to flow both ways. The universe could not rest on one man's shoulders forever. Sometimes it needed a few thousand more, properly fed, and still they worked. Decade after decade, generation after generation, the pyramids rose from the desert like patience made visible. When the last block slid into place, the workers cheered, drank, and probably complained about the next one. Then they walked away, leaving behind monuments so perfect they made their own exhaustion invisible. The desert has no memory of sweat, but the stones do. If you touch them today, in the heat, you can feel a kind of warmth that isn't sunlight, the stored labour of countless hands. Each block is a sentence in a language that says, "We were here, we tried to build forever, and for a while, it worked." Even divine projects have deadlines. Even eternity needs maintenance. The workers slept beneath stars that their own chisels had described in temple ceilings. They dreamed of bread, of cool water, of laughter under shade. And perhaps somewhere in the quiet between dreams, they also felt a strange pride. The knowledge that their calloused hands were shaping the afterlife of kings. The pyramids still stand, though the names of their builders have long faded. But maybe that's fitting. In a culture where the soul was believed to live as long as its name was spoken, these workers achieved something remarkable. They made their pharaohs immortal and themselves anonymous, merging into the architecture of faith. Their labour became landscape. Their noise became silence. Their sweat became sand. When you look at the pyramids now, shimmering against the horizon, you see more than stone. You see devotion in human form, flawed, tired, endlessly determined. You see a civilization that mistook perfection for permanence and somehow, through sheer stubbornness, almost proved itself right. Even gods, it seems, needed a workforce. If we follow the thread a little further, it leads away from the light of the desert and back into the sanctuaries of the living, toward festivals, parades, and the endless performance of holiness that kept a civilization convinced it was eternal. The day of the festival begins before dawn, when the air still tastes faintly of night. In the palace courtyard, priests move like silhouettes through the mist, their torches burning small holes in the darkness. Far beyond the walls, the people are already gathering, waiting for the first glimpse of their living God in motion. This is the Sed Festival, the Jubilee of Renewal, a celebration that was part marathon, part miracle. Every 30 years, a pharaoh had to prove that he still carried divine stamina. The ceremony announced not age, but endurance. It told the gods, and perhaps the people, that the man who ran the kingdom could still run. From a distance, it looks like a parade. In truth, it is a carefully choreographed negotiation between the mortal and the eternal. The festival's name came from a word older than memory, meaning tail. Some say it referred to the lion's tail that hung from the pharaoh's robe, a symbol of primal strength. Others think it meant the trailing procession that followed him, a long river of courtiers, priests, and banners. Either way, the meaning was the same, a power with a pulse, trumpet sound, deep and steady, echoing across the sand. The first light of morning spills down the temple steps, painting the banners gold. The pharaoh appears at the top of the causeway, flanked by priests carrying symbols of his reign. The crook and flail, the sceptres of command, the white and red crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. He stands still for a moment, allowing the world to remember him. Then he begins to move. The path before him is lined with carved stone markers, the ritual track of eternity. Each step he takes follows a pattern older than writing. He walks the boundary of his kingdom in miniature, circling the world he owns and the afterlife he will one day inherit. The drums quicken, the chants rise, the crowd murmurs approval. Then, unexpectedly, he runs. It is not a sprint, not a show of youthful arrogance, but a measured jog that sends ripples through the crowd. Priests count his paces aloud, voices rising above the wind. The pharaoh's robe, heavy with embroidery, flares behind him. The lion's tail swings in rhythm. His crown glints with sunlight. He runs to prove that time has not caught him. You can almost feel the strain beneath the symbolism, the breath held too long, the ache behind the gold mask of composure. But no one dares to notice. This is not about distance, it's about persistence. When the run ends, he ascends a raised platform built for the ceremony. Courtiers throw petals, the air fills with dust and sweetness. He lifts his arms, greeting the gods with a gesture that looks suspiciously like triumph. Around him, dancers whirl in circles, their white linen flashing like wings. Musicians strike drums made from stretched hide. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, like the heartbeat of the sun itself. At the centre of it all, the pharaoh stands as if carved from light. The priests declare him reborn, not metaphorically but officially. The living Horus has renewed his license to exist. The old man, if he was old, has been upgraded to Divinity 2.0, and yet behind the celebration lies a quiet truth. The said festival was less a party than an annual performance review. The gods expected evidence that the world's balance remained intact, and the pharaoh's body was the presentation slide. If he stumbled, it meant the universe had developed cracks. If he finished strong, eternity could rest easy until next time. The theology may sound grand, but the humanity underneath is what lingers. You can imagine the exhaustion at the edge of ceremony, the heavy breathing hidden behind chants, the trembling muscles disguised by layers of linen and pride. The priests would later call it renewal. The pharaoh might have called it sore knees. After the run came feasting. The people received food and beer, the priests distributed tokens of blessing, and the court filled with laughter that was almost genuine. For one day, Egypt felt safe again. The crops would grow, the sun would rise. The divine contract had been renewed in sweat and spectacle. The scent of roasted meat drifted through the courtyards. Children chased one another between pillars. Musicians played reed flutes that sounded like birds calling from the marsh. In the royal tent, courtiers toasted the pharaoh's strength, their smiles wide but their eyes measuring. Everyone loved a god, but no one wanted a tired one. By sunset, the festival began to slow. The light turned amber, the drum softened to a heartbeat. The pharaoh sat upon his throne, watching dancers twirl their final circles. His gaze was distant, half devotion, half calculation. He knew what the crowd believed, that this ritual would keep him young, that the sun would keep him strong. But he also knew the truth written quietly in every breath. No performance lasts forever. Still, as twilight deepened, he stood once more and raised his arms to the sky. The crowd cheered. The priests bowed. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun was already sinking, but Egypt did not fear its departure. It would return tomorrow, just as their king had returned from symbolic death today. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of incense and sand. Banners fluttered, torches swayed, and the music dissolved into night. The people began their long walk home, their laughter soft, their faith renewed. From the top of the platform, the pharaoh looked out over his kingdom, a sea of firelight and movement fading into the dark. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe like a man, not a myth. The wind cooled his skin, the stars blinked awake one by one, and the drums at last fell silent. Eternity, it turned out, had a surprisingly strict cardio requirement. If we follow the thread a little further, the scene shifts from ceremony to leisure, from public performance to private illusion, where even relaxation was designed, and pleasure came with rules carved in stone. The desert has a sound all its own. It hums softly, as if remembering every voice that ever shouted across it. On some mornings, when the pharaoh rode out to hunt, that hum became his only witness. Around him stretched endless gold and pale horizon, broken only by the silhouettes of acacia trees and the flutter of startled birds. He rode in a chariot of polished wood, the wheels creaking like whispered prayers. The horses snorted clouds of hot breath, their harnesses flashing with inlaid gems. Servants ran ahead to scatter sand from the path, though the wind quickly replaced it. Behind him came guards, scribes, and the inevitable priest holding an umbrella of woven reeds. A god must not tan unevenly. Hunting for Pharaoh was not sport, it was choreography. When he drew his bow, he wasn't simply aiming at gazelles or lions, he was reenacting creation itself. Each arrow symbolized order piercing chaos, civilization asserting its right to exist. The animal, noble or otherwise, played the part of disorder. To kill it cleanly was to remind the world that balance had been restored for another day. From a distance, it might have looked glorious, the chariot charging, dust spiraling like incense, arrows cutting through air. Up close it was quieter, the creak of leather, the strain of muscles, the brief whistle before impact. When the arrow struck, the sound was dull, final. A small act of violence sanctified by theology. The pharaoh would step down, lift the slain creature's head, and whisper a prayer of thanks. The priest called it an offering. Perhaps it was also apology. The scribes recorded everything in crisp hieroglyphs. The number of arrows, the species of the hunted, the precise moment when the sun touched his shoulder. Even the gods required proper documentation. The hunt ended at midday when the desert began to shimmer with heat. The royal procession turned back toward the palace where cool shade and perfumed gardens waited. Here, the pharaoh could rest, or at least pretend to. Egyptian gardens were miracles in miniature, grown where nature should have refused. Canals fed by the Nile wound through enclosed courtyards. Papyrus reeds and date palms stood in symmetrical rows. The air smelled of damp earth and lotus. Pools mirrored the sky, their surfaces broken only by the glide of ducks arranged, as one gardener proudly noted, in the correct divine number. Even leisure here came with arithmetic. The pharaoh walked these paths surrounded by attendants holding fans and trays of fruit. Somewhere nearby, musicians played lutes in soft repetition. A queen might stroll beside him, her robe whispering against the gravel. Children laughed near the fish pond, watched carefully to ensure their joy remained photogenic. He paused by the water, watching sunlight ripple across the surface. The reflection that looked back was not his face, but his symbol. The crown, the collar, the illusion of perfection. A man could vanish easily inside that reflection. For a brief moment, he envied the ducks. They had no temples to maintain, no prayers to recite, no divine minutes to approve. They floated, entirely obedient to water and instinct. But freedom in this world was a dangerous word. Even the gardens, carefully designed to suggest paradise, were contained within walls. Every flower had its purpose, every tree its place, every bird its assigned pool. Disorder was not permitted, only rehearsed. The gardeners knew the schedule as well as the priests. At sunrise, lotus blooms opened to greet Ra. At sunset, they closed again, timed to his departure. Each petal became a clock, each fragrance a quiet amen. Visitors admired the order. The gardeners knew the cost. To keep a paradise alive in the desert required endless labour and endless water, borrowed from a river that never asked permission. Sometimes the pharaoh hosted feasts in these gardens. Tables of polished wood were set beneath the palms, piled with bread, figs, roasted goose and wine thick as syrup. Harpists played, dancers moved, and laughter drifted across the pools. Yet even laughter here followed form. The guests were expected to marvel at divine generosity, to toast the unending strength of their ruler. No one mentioned that the man at the centre of it all looked tired. There is a relief carved on a temple wall showing such a feast. Pharaoh raising a cup, his smile carved eternal, while servants pour and guests applaud. It looks joyous until you notice the symmetry. Every gesture mirrors the next. Even celebration was a ritual. Another way to prove that the gods were pleased, and therefore so was everyone else. You might think a king so adored would feel content, but contentment was not part of the royal contract. perfection leaves no room for rest. As night fell, he would leave the party quietly, stepping back into corridors that smelled faintly of myrrh and fatigue. Behind him, laughter continued, trained and echoing. Ahead of him waited the next morning, another ceremony, another reenactment of balance. In a civilization that saw the world as fragile order surrounded by chaos, leisure had to be disciplined. Even the ducks were arranged by decree. Still, there must have been moments when the illusion cracked, when the king, sitting by the water, let his reflection blur and allowed himself to imagine being ordinary. To feel the breeze without worrying whether it carried a sign from the gods. To look at the garden not as symbolism, but as simple green shade. To forget briefly that his every breath was part of the cosmic performance. Perhaps he reached into the pool once just to touch the water. Cool, clear, alive. It would have rippled outward in perfect circles, erasing his reflection for an instant. Then the image reformed. Crown, robe, composure restored. The man vanished. The god remained. The hunt, the feast, the garden, all different faces of the same stage. Order, beauty, repetition. To rule in Egypt was to be both gardener and statue, both hunter and prey. As twilight deepens, torches light the path back to the palace. The pharaoh walks slowly beneath the palms. The air hums with frogs, crickets, and the distant sound of a flute. Somewhere behind him, the gardeners close the gates, trapping perfection safely inside for the night. From here, the story shifts inward again. To the animals who shared the pharaoh's palace and his prayers, creatures worshipped, adorned, and sometimes preserved as company for eternity. The palace was never quiet for long. Between the rustle of linen and the echo of sandals, another kind of life padded softly through its corridors. Eyes glinted from the shadows, green, gold, and unblinking. The pharaoh was never truly alone because Egypt's gods had fur, feathers, and claws. In this world, animals were not property. They were translators, half-spoken prayers that walked on four legs. The Egyptians saw in every creature a piece of divinity given shape, a lesson, a warning, or sometimes just companionship. The cat, graceful and self-possessed, reflected the goddess Bastet, protector of homes and bringer of serenity. The ibis echoed Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. The falcon, swift and fierce, carried Horus himself across the horizon each morning. In the royal palace, these animals were honoured guests. Cats roamed freely among the columns, tails held high, their soft steps making no sound on the cool limestone floors. Servants left bowls of milk near the doorways, though the cats preferred whatever they weren't supposed to touch. One might curl up on a papyrus scroll destined for the archives. Another might nap in a patch of sunlight on the pharaoh's favourite rug. No one dared move them. To disturb a cat was to risk offending both goddess and decoration. Baboons, mischievous and half-divine, sat on balconies during sunrise rituals, their chatter merging with the priestly hymns. They were said to greet the dawn in honour of Ra, the sun god, though it's likely they just enjoyed the warmth. Their shrieks filled the air as if mocking the solemn chants below. The priests didn't mind, they called it participation. There were dogs too, lean hounds bred for the hunt, their collars inlaid with copper and turquoise. They followed the pharaoh's chariot into the desert, racing alongside horses in bursts of dust. When one died, its body was wrapped in linen and buried with ceremony, sometimes beneath small stone markers shaped like tiny temples. To love an animal here was not sentimentality, it was faith with a heartbeat. Even the dangerous creatures had worshippers. Crocodiles lounged in temple ponds, fat and silent, wearing collars of gold. They represented Sobek, lord of strength, and the Nile's unpredictable mercy. Priests fed them meat and sang to them, hoping the real Sobek, wherever he swam, was listening. Snakes, symbols of healing, were painted on walls near places of medicine. Bulls, incarnations of virility and might, were paraded through cities crowned with flowers before being mummified in tombs lined with incense jars. To modern eyes, it might seem excessive, a civilization that embalmed cats, birds, and even fish. But to the Egyptians, the line between human and animal was thin and generous. Life itself was sacred, and no form of it was too humble to matter. When the pharaoh's favourite pet died, priests prepared it as carefully as they would a noble. They removed the organs, filled the body with fragrant oils, wrapped it in linen, and placed it beside its master's tomb. Love was eternal, and eternity required good company. You can almost smell those funerals, the blend of resin and fur, the soft rustle of linen being wound, the low hum of chants spoken for a creature who never spoke a word in return. Somewhere in that ceremony lingers the same tenderness that drives people even now to carve names on collars, to bury pets beneath flowering trees, to whisper goodbyes if they might still understand. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover cat cemeteries where thousands of tiny mummies lay stacked neatly in rows. Their linen wrappings, painted faces, and amulets of bronze bells told a story of devotion so widespread it blurred the line between affection and worship. Some cats were buried with toys, others with bowls of milk turned to dust. The priests may have managed the rituals, but the emotion belonged to the people. Bastet was more than a goddess. She was an excuse to love openly in a world otherwise built on ceremony. Modern science, with its lights and scans, has peered into those tiny bundles. Beneath the wrappings, it found bones curled in perfect repose, paws tucked close as if still asleep. The instruments recorded dimensions, density, fragments of pigment. But the data can't measure reverence. You look at those faces, still, painted, gentle, and you realise that devotion once given never truly decays. Inside the palace, it was said that even the pharaoh's lions were trained to bow. Whether that's true or not hardly matters. In Egypt, stories became truth simply by being told often enough. A king who commanded beasts was proof of order, a reminder that Ma'at, the balance of the world, flowed from his will. When the lions roared, the people said they were announcing royal contentment. When they slept, they said the kingdom was safe. Perhaps that was the point of it all. To rule the natural world through kindness disguised as hierarchy, to find, in every creature's eyes, a reflection of divinity simple enough to trust. Animals didn't lie, didn't scheme, didn't plot. They just existed, exactly as they were meant to. The Egyptians envied that certainty, and in that envy, they found beauty. A baboon greeting the sunrise, a cat cleaning its paw beneath a painted column, a dog's bark echoing through the courtyard. Each small gesture felt like a hymn. Every heartbeat, no matter how small, confirmed that the gods were still paying attention. Heaven, after all, had a pet policy, and everyone obeyed it. As we drift further into the palace, the animals fade into silence, leaving behind their footprints in the sand and their warmth in the air. The next room is quieter, colder. Here, no creature moves. Only symbols remain, etched into every inch of the walls. In this space, even perfection begins to tremble as superstition takes the throne and the gods themselves become nervous of being forgotten. Power has a strange aftertaste. To rule Egypt was to dine on fear seasoned with devotion. Every movement of the pharaoh, every glance, every breath carried meaning, and meaning was a dangerous luxury. When the body of a man is declared divine, even the smallest mistake becomes cosmic. By the late dynasties, superstition had become its own architecture. The palace was a maze of rules disguised as reverence. The pharaoh was not merely king, he was the axis on which the universe turned. If he sneezed in the wrong direction, a priest wrote a corrective hymn. If he tripped, the scribes invented a metaphor for humility. The gods demanded precision, and Egypt obliged with exhausting devotion. Each morning began the same way. Before dawn, servants entered the royal chambers carrying censers of incense and bowls of fresh water drawn from the Nile. The air smelled of myrrh and smoke, thick enough to taste. The pharaoh opened his eyes slowly because waking too abruptly was considered risky. The soul might lag behind. His first breath of the day was a prayer rehearsed since childhood. May the sun rise within me as it does in heaven. He stood, not freely but ceremonially. 1 foot, always the right, touched the floor first. To use the left would invite reversal, an omen of decline. The floor itself had been swept by priests, who recited protective verses as they moved. Even the dust in this place had a liturgy. The royal barbers trimmed his hair in patterns meant to please the gods. His clothes were folded in exact sequence, linen layered north to south, like the flow of the river. A scribe stood nearby, noting the order, ensuring continuity. The pharaoh's silence during these hours was not serenity, it was necessity. The first word he spoke each day had to be auspicious. Some mornings, servants waited in anxious stillness, wondering whether he would choose life or light. To begin with pain or sleep might doom the weather. The palace walls whispered with such invisible pressures. Statues faced particular directions. Mirrors were avoided after sunset. No one dared cast their shadow over a god's image. Even doorways required choreography. One must enter with the right hand raised and the heart steady. Visitors were trained like dancers, performing reverence by reflex. To us, it sounds exhausting. To them, it was survival. The universe, they believed, balanced on threads of intention. A single misstep could tilt the world toward chaos, and who would want that written on their job description? As the day continued, rituals multiplied. Before meetings, priests purified the throne room with water and words. Before meals, tasters sampled the food 3 times, not out of fear of poison, but to ensure it contained no lingering shadow of yesterday's curses. The pharaoh never drank from a cup until it had been blessed, tilted slightly toward the east, and waved over flame. Every sip was a negotiation with fate. Even leisure carried rules. The royal garden, that green oasis of calm, had designated walking paths aligned with celestial geometry. The pharaoh's steps were measured to mimic the orbit of the planets. When he rested beneath a tree, an attendant fanned him with a pattern matching the rhythm of Nile currents. This was not relaxation. It was performance, rehearsed and unending. The priests who maintained these rituals were both guardians and jailers. They recorded his gestures, monitored his omens, interpreted his dreams. If he dreamed of birds flying west, they might call for a purification. If he dreamed of water flooding the halls, they might cancel construction projects. Dreaming, once private, became part of policy. In theory, the pharaoh ruled all Egypt. In practice, Egypt ruled him through etiquette, ceremony, and the invisible threads of expectation. He was God, yes, but a god on a schedule. One wrong symbol could invite chaos. A mispronounced word could summon drought. The sound of silence when a chant faltered made even the statues seem to listen. The pharaoh's face, carved calm and eternal, hid a mind constantly checking for signs. Bird flight, candle flicker, patterns in sand. Superstition was not foolishness. It was anxiety with a theology degree. And yet, within all that structure, there was an odd kind of peace. Predictability became comfort. The same gestures repeated every day meant the world still worked. To live in perfect choreography was to hold back the unknown. Order became oxygen. You can almost hear the rhythm of that life, the soft brush of linen robes, the echo of sandals on polished floors, the chant of priests in the next room. The sound of power was not thunder, it was repetition. But late at night, when the incense burned low and the palace fell quiet, another sound would emerge, the whisper of unease. The pharaoh might lie awake, staring at the carved ceiling painted with stars. If every gesture was sacred, could any gesture still be human? If every word was divine, where did honesty go to sleep? He could not simply step outside and feel the wind. He could not laugh without it being noted as a favourable omen. Even solitude had a schedule. In a world where everything meant something, nothing could simply be. It's tempting to pity him, but superstition was not punishment. It was control disguised as devotion. Egypt's gods were everywhere, and everywhere required maintenance. The pharaoh's job was not to live freely. It was to keep the lights on in eternity. When everything is sacred, you never get to relax. The palace corridors stretch into darkness, lit only by torches that hiss softly in the draught. A servant passes by, head bowed, carrying a bowl of milk for a cat who sleeps beside a statue. Somewhere far away, a priest coughs, then whispers another prayer just in case. The silence resumes. The air smells of gold, dust, and the faint, sweet ache of faith. If we follow the thread a little further, the sound of footsteps fades into the distant hammering of stone, where another ruler carved by time itself begins to build his eternity not from fear, but from fame. His name is Ramesses, and he plans to make sure the world never stops saying it. If divine kingship was performance, Ramesses II was its headline act. He ruled for 66 years, long enough for his enemies to die, his monuments to multiply, and his sculptors to develop repetitive strain injuries. When other pharaohs sought immortality, Ramesses II simply commissioned it. Stone was his social media, every temple wall his feed. He edited eternity one cartouche at a time. Even his name was engineered for endurance. Ramesses, born of Ra. To say it aloud was to advertise the sun itself. He had a genius for self-promotion centuries before marketing departments were invented. Where others built for gods, he built slightly larger for himself. Purely for scale consistency, of course. You can picture the rhythm of his empire. A hammer strikes, dust rises, scribes note dimensions, priests bless foundations, and somewhere in the distance another worker faints from admiration and heat exhaustion. The sound of Egypt under Ramesses was steady percussion, thousands of tools hitting the idea of permanence. He began his reign with ambition, married multiple queens, sired enough children to populate a small kingdom, and built temples that could be seen from miles away. His reign was long enough for generations of builders to live and die under his projects. Imagine growing up in a village near a construction site that never ends. Your grandfather hauled limestone for the foundations, your father carved hieroglyphs, and now you're polishing a statue's knee that still isn't finished. Progress reports were written in decades. At Abu Simbel, he ordered the mountain itself reshaped. 4 colossal statues of his seated form stare east toward the rising sun, faces serene, identical, and slightly competitive. Each one stands over 20 meters tall, less sculpture than geological event. The precision remains uncanny. Shoulders level, gaze unwavering, smile calculated somewhere between benevolence and advertisement. Step closer, and you notice the human touch. Tool marks faint under the polish, pigment traces in corners of stone lips, hieroglyphs that repeat his titles like hashtags. Beloved of Amun, Strong Bull, Lord of Appearances. It's impossible to forget who sponsored the monument. Modesty in his vocabulary was just a variant of erosion. Inside, the walls continue the campaign. Battle scenes stretch across them, rivers of carved chaos ending always in his victory. The Battle of Kadesh, fought against the Hittites, was technically a stalemate. Artistically, it became the greatest triumph since creation. Scribes multiplied the account across Egypt so efficiently that future historians assumed he must have won simply because he kept saying so. He understood something timeless: control the narrative, and the gods will follow. The temples at Luxor and Karnak bear his additions like autographs. He left inscriptions claiming credit for restorations done by predecessors, a habit that might be called plagiarism by stone chisel. Yet Egypt loved him for it. His monuments glowed under the desert sun. His name echoed through generations. Even the priests who rolled their eyes had to read the inscriptions aloud. In a land where speaking a name kept the soul alive, Ramesses ensured immortality through repetition. The physical empire mirrored this abundance. Grain silos filled, trade routes pulsed, craftsmen prospered. Peace, at least within the propaganda, became his proof of divine favour. The people called him the Great Ancestor. He probably approved the title's typography himself, and yet there was tenderness in the spectacle. Among his wives, Nefertari stood apart. Her tomb, carved in glowing ochre and deep blue, remains one of Egypt's most beautiful. The walls show her beside the gods, equal in grace, her eyes outlined with malachite, her smile serene. Above the entrance a line still reads, "For whom the sun rises." In a lifetime spent branding the eternal, he left one monument that feels like love rather than strategy. Centuries later, when explorers first entered that tomb, they said it smelled faintly of flowers and dust. The pigments on the ceiling stars still shone. Even in his affection, Ramesses had aimed for longevity and accidentally achieved poetry. His vast family filled an entire necropolis. KV5, the tomb of his sons, is the largest in the Valley of the Kings, corridors curling like veins through stone, hundreds of chambers carved for heirs who mostly outlive their purpose. Walking through them today feels like entering the footnotes of a dynasty. Each room a reminder that even excess needs structure. If immortality was his goal, he nearly succeeded. When his mummy was found, the body told a simple truth. The man who built eternity also aged. White hair still clung to his skull, his jaw strong, his expression peaceful in that familiar way of those who finally stopped managing their own legend. Time, the one rival he couldn't edit, had the last inscription. And yet, somehow, his plan worked. 3,000 years later, people still speak his name, still travel across continents to stand in the sun glare beneath his statues, still whisper, "Ramesses the Great," with the same awe his builders must have felt. Marketing goals rarely age this well. Standing before one of his colossal faces, you can feel the heat radiate from the stone like breath. The eyes look past you, toward some endless horizon of self-belief. You can almost hear the whisper beneath the wind. "Remember me, and the world stays balanced." Maybe that's vanity. Maybe it's religion. In Egypt, the two are never mutually exclusive. The chisel stopped centuries ago, but the echo remains. Proof that a sound, if loud enough, can outlive the hands that made it. He edited eternity, and eternity kept the edits. As we drift further into the story, the sunlight begins to change colour. It grows harsher, more blinding, because another pharaoh will arrive who dares to change the script entirely, to rewrite heaven with a single god and a single name, and to discover that even sunlight can cast a dangerous shadow. Some rulers build monuments to eternity. Akhenaten tried to edit eternity itself. Before him, Egypt's gods were a crowded family. Falcons and jackals, crocodiles, cows and cats, all coexisting in divine bureaucracy. The temples hummed with chants, each deity accepting offerings, each priest collecting influence. Then Akhenaten looked up, squinting against the desert glare, and decided the sky had room for only one. He called it Aten, the sun disk, giver of warmth and light. Not the human-shaped Ra of old myths, but the circle itself, rays stretching down like fingers ending in open hands. It was faith stripped of face, religion boiled down to illumination. To him, the sunlight wasn't just light, it was presence, direct, tangible, democratic. It touched rich and poor alike. No priest could monopolize it, Perhaps that was the real heresy, not theology, but transparency. He changed everything: the art, the hymns, the names of cities, even his own name. Once called Amenhotep IV, Amun is satisfied. He erased the old god and became Akhenaten, effective for the 18. To make sure everyone got the message, he ordered the old god's names chiseled from walls. Whole pantheons vanished under the hammer's rhythm. Dust replaced prayer. Then he did something no pharaoh had dared before. He left Thebes, spiritual capital of Egypt, and built an entirely new city in the desert. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. To modern archaeologists, it is known as Amarna, but at the time it must have looked like an idea made of limestone. The city rose quickly, rows of open courtyards and wide avenues, temples without roofs so sunlight could fall directly onto the altars. Every wall bloomed with images of the royal family basking in golden beams, arms lifted, faces turned toward the sky. The art changed too. No more stiff perfection. Figures stretched long and slender, bellies round, necks graceful, gestures intimate. Akhenaten appeared not as warrior or giant, but as dreamer. He held his queen, Nefertiti, and their children in tender poses. The royal family kissed, laughed, and played beneath the shining hands of Aten. It was as if Egypt had discovered softness. The carvings show sunlight landing on their faces like affection. You can almost feel the warmth through the stone, as if the sculptors were trying to teach granite how to smile. For a moment it worked. The hymns of Aten glowed with calm joy. Thou dawnest fair in the horizon of the sky, O living Aten, creator of life. The tone was gentle, not commanding. It spoke of peace, abundance, and light that needed no temple to prove itself. But faith, like desert wind, can change direction quickly. The priests of Amun, stripped of their power, watched in silence as their temples emptied. Ordinary people, used to the comfort of many gods, now had only one, and he was distant, abstract, impossible to negotiate with. A sunbeam can't answer prayers, it can only shine. As years passed, the capital gleamed brighter and lonelier. The fields around Amarna dried, the granaries emptied. Even the royal workshops slowed their production of endless devotion. What began as revelation started to feel like isolation. Akhenaten's letters to his officials survive. Polite requests for grain, soldiers, attention. The tone is calm, but the edges tremble. The empire he had inherited was slipping quietly away while he stood transfixed, watching the light. Nefertiti's presence, once radiant beside him, fades from the record halfway through his reign. Some scholars say she died. Others whisper she ruled for a time under another name. The carvings grow fewer, the festivals smaller. Amarna's avenues filled with heat and silence. One hymn written near the end of his life reads almost like apology. Thou risest in the east, but thy ways are hidden. The god of light had become too bright to see. When Akhenaten died, his experiment unravelled instantly. The priests returned, sweeping dust from the old temples, calling the many gods home like offended relatives. The sun disk faded into mere ornament. Statues of Akhenaten were smashed, his name erased from walls, his city abandoned to the desert. Within a generation, even his memory was treated as contagion. And yet, his strange dream refused to vanish entirely. In the empty courtyards of Amarna, the wind still glows. The broken reliefs still shimmer at noon. The art he commissioned, so human, so gentle, remains unmatched in tenderness. You can see the care with which a sculptor carved a child reaching for her father's face. You can almost feel the warmth of a light that once felt like truth. Centuries later, when explorers first rediscovered those ruins, the sun hit them exactly as it had under Akhenaten's gaze. The walls flared golden, as if the Aten had never left, merely waited for an audience. The city had become its own monument to impermanence. a skeleton of faith bleached by the very light that inspired it. In the end, Akhenaten's greatest sin was not rebellion but sincerity. He believed the world could be simple. He forgot that people rarely are. Egypt forgave him eventually, but only by forgetting. His heresy became dust, his sunlight myth, his city an archaeological question mark. Still, there's something hauntingly modern in his failure. A man who believed clarity would save him, only to find that clarity can also blind. The Aten shone on everyone, but its warmth was not enough to hold them together. He changed heaven's playlist, and nobody forgave him. As the sun sets over his silent city, the sand begins to rise again, covering the stones one by one. The rays that once blessed the world now fade into twilight, and yet, somewhere beneath that calm, the story continues, because the gods have learned a new trick. Light no longer shines only from the sky. Now it comes from machines, from science, from the quiet hum of instruments that look through wrappings and bone. In the next chapter, immortality will be reborn not through prayer, but through electricity. 3,000 years after the last priest sealed a tomb, the air inside finally stirs again, not with chants or torches, but with the quiet whir of a machine. A beam of light sweeps slowly across a bandaged body, revealing in cross-sections what time once swore to keep secret. The Egyptians called this immortality. We call it imaging. In a way, it's the same ritual, just translated into another language. Where priests once murmured spells to wake the soul, scientists now press buttons to awaken data. Where incense once filled the room, now hums the faint ozone scent of electricity. The goal hasn't changed: to understand death, to keep it talking. Under the glow of monitors, a mummy appears not as relic, but as map. Each layer of linen, each amulet, each joint preserved by ancient salt is rendered visible in soft blue light. You watch ribs curve like forgotten architecture, teeth clenched in mid-eternity, heart missing by sacred design. The screen hums faintly, and for a moment you could believe the gods have learned to speak binary. No one here chants, but the rhythm is the same: scan, rotate, reveal. The machine exhales, the computer whispers, and history flickers into view one slice at a time. CT, computed tomography, though really it might as well stand for continuing theology. Instead of prayers, numbers. Instead of priests, radiologists. The afterlife, recalculated in megabytes. The first time researchers scanned the mummy of Rameses the Great, the image revealed details the embalmers never expected anyone to see: fractures, resin plugs, delicate repairs to keep his jaw from falling slack. It turned out even gods needed maintenance. His throat still bore faint traces of the amulets placed there to ensure speech in eternity. The digital beam caught their outlines perfectly, like small echoes of faith preserved in calcium and wax. Another scan looked inside Tutankhamun, the boy king who outlived his own dynasty in fame, if not in years. Light passed through him gently, showing a spine that curved like a question mark and a leg twisted by bone disease. Once his deformities were dismissed as myth, now they shimmered quietly on a monitor, proof that divinity had limped. Even royalty, it seemed, carried inherited errors, the genetic echo of a family that married itself too faithfully. Scientists described it clinically: familial anomalies, skeletal malformation, probable infection. The ancient priests would have said the same thing differently. The body remembered patterns never meant to repeat. Both languages, in their own way, mean sorrow. Elsewhere, isotopic testing of hair and teeth traced the diets of the long dead. You could tell which pharaohs feasted on honey and duck, and which workers lived on onions and barley beer. Microscopic grains of sand lodged in mummified lungs revealed the direction of the desert wind the day they died. Even time has fingerprints, it seems. DNA, the alphabet of flesh, carried quieter stories still. In laboratories where silence is policy, scientists compared ancient genes with modern Egyptians, finding fragments that endured, hints that the bloodlines of farmers, builders, and even royal households still pulse faintly in Cairo's crowds today. The pharaoh's immortality, it turns out, may have worked more literally than anyone intended. There is a certain poetry in this modern unwrapping. The ancient embalmers built eternity layer by layer. We remove it, layer by layer, with light instead of knives. They sealed the past so it could live untouched. We open it so it can live understood. Both gestures are acts of love disguised as curiosity. Inside museums, the atmosphere mimics the stillness of tombs. Temperature constant, humidity controlled. Visitors move slowly, whispering instinctively as though the dead could still overhear. Glass cases glow softly from beneath, giving every artifact the faint halo of resurrection. The faces behind the glass look unchanged, calm, distant, mildly amused by our fascination. Their immortality has been converted to a maintenance schedule. Archaeologists sometimes joke that they have replaced the ancient priesthood, but the comparison isn't far off. They speak a liturgy of measurement and conservation. Their tools are laptops and latex gloves. Their prayers are protocols. They too believe in second lives. Only theirs are called reconstructions. In 3D renderings, mummies become portraits again. Muscles bloom over bone, skin stretches, eyes return in digital colour. Tutankhamun's face, once hidden behind gold, now looks back at us in pixels. Young, solemn, unmistakably human. The light that once consecrated him as divine now exposes him as fragile. It feels strangely intimate, almost intrusive, to meet his gaze across millennia. We have resurrected him not into paradise, but into high-resolution empathy. The irony is exquisite. The priests laboured to preserve these bodies so they could live forever unseen. The scientists now preserve them so they can be seen by everyone. Eternity has gone public. Sometimes, as technicians lean close to a screen, you can catch the reflection of their own faces merging briefly with the image of the Ancient One. For an instant, two timelines overlap, the living and the embalmed sharing the same glow. It is hard not to feel that something sacred happens there, even if the language for it has changed. In that sense, the Egyptians were right all along. The soul doesn't vanish, it migrates into memory. Every new discovery keeps them speaking, not through ritual, but through recognition. The gods granted immortality. It just arrived later, powered by electricity and curiosity. The machines fall silent, their work done. The room grows dim again. Behind the glass, the mummy rests exactly as before, unbothered by our interpretations. Outside, the sun sets. The same sun Akhenaten once worshipped. The same warmth that has brushed these faces for 5,000 years. Light never really changes its job. It only learns new tricks. As night deepens, you can almost hear the quiet hum of the past still working. 1,000 souls under gentle observation, perfectly preserved between mythology and math. From here, the story moves toward its final echo, to the one thing that has outlasted both gods and machines, the human need to be remembered, and the fragile eternity carried by a name whispered in the dark. Night falls again over the Nile. The river moves quietly beneath a sky the colour of copper and dust. The stars appear one by one, as if waking from ancient sleep. Somewhere beyond the horizon lie the tombs, their doors sealed, their corridors lined with words carved for ears that no longer hear. The air smells of stone still warm from the day's heat, of sand cooling under the breath of wind. Egypt, in the dark, is the same Egypt it has always been, half desert, half memory. The pharaohs believed that as long as a name was spoken, the soul lived on. They built this truth into their civilization like a code, hieroglyphs carved deep, repeated endlessly on every temple, every statue, every ring. A name was a vessel, a kind of a heartbeat made visible. To erase it was murder, to speak it was resurrection. You can see this belief everywhere, in the colossal cartouches circling royal titles, in the repetition of prayers across walls, in the way a single symbol might appear thousands of times in a single tomb. The ancients didn't trust silence. They wrote themselves loudly enough to survive forgetting. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. We still speak them: Khufu, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Ramesses. Their names have crossed millennia of weather and conquest, outliving their empires, their enemies, even their gods. The pantheon may have retired, but the vocabulary endures. That, perhaps, was the real afterlife all along. In the museums of the world, their faces rest under soft lights. Visitors lean close, whispering the names aloud, often uncertain of pronunciation, but sincere in intention. A tourist's breath becomes a modern spell, another small offering to continuity. Somewhere, if belief is a kind of echo, the pharaohs must hear it and smile. The irony is gentle but complete. The quest for eternity ended not in heaven but in human curiosity. The monuments they built to resist time are now maintained by people who no longer pray to them but still feel a quiet awe in their presence. We polish their glass cases, control their humidity, and record their data. In preserving their remains, we have accidentally fulfilled their wish to be cared for forever. It's easy to think of them as proud, unreachable beings, but the more we learn, the more human they become. Under the golden linen were bones that broke, teeth that ached, hearts that failed. They loved, feared, aged, and made mistakes. Their faith, for all its ceremony, was simply a way of negotiating with impermanence. They wanted what everyone wants, to mean something after the light goes out. That need hasn't changed. Every photograph, every social profile, every line we write, every name whispered in love or frustration, it's all part of the same instinct. The wish to be remembered. The pharaohs only had better handwriting. In a way, we've become their successors. Our screens glow with symbols instead of hieroglyphs. Our archives exist in invisible clouds instead of stone, but the message is the same. I was here, don't forget. The difference is that they carved theirs for eternity. We update ours daily. The desert teaches patience. Wind smooths the edges of monuments. Stars outlast kings. Yet somehow, Egypt never feels sad about it. Its ruins do not mourn. They glow. Every scar on a wall, every broken nose on a statue, is proof that even perfection can age gracefully. Eternity, it turns out, doesn't mean untouched. It means remembered despite the touch. You stand now at the edge of the Valley of the Kings, listening. The air is perfectly still, but it feels full of breath, as if the world itself is holding one long exhale. The mountains rise like folded parchment, their faces carved by wind and faith. Somewhere beneath your feet, chambers twist in darkness, filled with painted ceilings, sleeping gods, and the faint perfume of resin that hasn't faded in 4,000 years. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear them. Chisels tapping faintly in the dark, a craftsman whispering a prayer for accuracy, a foreman counting rhythm, a scribe reading names aloud to test the sound forever. The words merge with the wind until there is no difference between labour and devotion. The world was built on both. Every name you whisper now becomes part of that same continuum. When you say Ramesses, the air moves. When you think Nefertiti, light shifts. When you remember Tutankhamun, a voice that once fell silent speaks again, quietly, patiently, through time. In the end, the pharaohs were right. The soul is not a thing to preserve. It is a story to retell. As long as someone listens, nothing truly dies. The gods have gone, but the listeners remain. And maybe that's enough. You too carry your own small dynasty. not of marble or gold, but of moments, gestures, and names whispered by others. Every smile you cause, every memory you leave behind becomes its own monument. You won't need a pyramid, you'll have stories instead. They travel farther, they weigh less, and they don't require maintenance. The desert wind grows cooler now, the stars are brighter, the tombs sleep without worry, the gods have clocked out for the evening. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, a sound older than the temples. The Nile sighs in its bed. Sand slides softly against stone, erasing a footprint and preserving the idea that someone once walked here. You can almost see it, the shimmer of eternity, not as a grand empire of gold, but as the quiet persistence of memory. Every civilization, every person leaves behind a trace, a word, a sound, a name. The rest is wind. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've outlasted a dynasty. If you've drifted off, even better. You've joined them in their favourite pastime. Either way, the story remains. Egypt breathes softly, its sand heavy with memory, its sky stitched with names that will never fade. Because eternity, after all, was never really about living forever. It was about not being forgotten. And that somehow is how it all made sense. Back then. If you're still awake, congratulations, you've survived another century. If you're asleep, even better, you've escaped it entirely. Either way, thank you for listening, liking, or just existing. History's still whispering, just softer now.